Keynote speaker this morning is a man who has written 11 books on real estate. He's a faculty member of Trump University, has never had a job to this day, and he's here to tell us more about how to achieve financial freedom. Please welcome Dr. Dolf de Roos. Dolf, welcome to the studio and welcome to South Africa.
Well, thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dolf, tell us a little bit what you are going to be doing in South Africa.
Well, Neil, we're doing a speaking tour of the country. We're doing a series of breakfast sessions, and then we're doing 2 one-day real estate trainings, one in each of Johannesburg and Cape Town.
Fantastic. Dolf, before we get on to the topic of the day, and which is how to buy real estate, and how to make money in real estate in the market, whether it's up or down, please tell us about your life story, about how you got into real estate and the evolution there. I think it's an absolute fascinating story.
Well, thank you, Neil. I got started at a very young age because I came from a family that believed highly in education. In fact, they indoctrinated into my sister and I that to do well in life, you have to study hard and get a degree. So it was without thinking when I finished high school that I went off to university. And during my very first week there, I looked around at me at the people with the degrees, the professors, the tutors, the lecturers, and it seemed to me that they were anything but rich. They wore shabby clothes, they drove around in old clunkers, and they seemed to have very modest homes. So 17 years of indoctrinations that degrees equates to wealth were kind of shattered, and I was disappointed. And I decided to do something about it, so I made a study of the rich. I thought it might take a week or so, but it ended up taking 9 months. I wanted to know what is it that the rich have in common, thinking, perhaps somewhat naively, that if I could identify 30 or 40 things that the rich did have in common, and if furthermore I could emulate those things, then I too could be rich. It seemed like a good theory to me at the time. The only challenge was I could hardly find anything that the rich had in common. It wasn't that they had the same gender, it wasn't that they had a certain age group, a religious belief or creed, it wasn't as if all the rich people were born into a particular country or were immigrant families or not, or firstborn or lastborn or anywhere in between, and it certainly had nothing to do with education. You think about it, the richest person on this planet, Bill Gates, is a dropout from Harvard University. The second richest person, Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle Computers, a college dropout. Third richest person, Paul Allen, the 2 I see at Microsoft, college dropout. There seems to be a pattern here. So I needed to get beyond this, and I could only find 2 things that the rich had in common. One of them was that almost without exception, the rich either made their money or held their wealth in real estate. And so without further thinking, at the tender age of 17, I decided to get into property. In fact, I identified the first property I wanted to buy, and off I went to the bank to apply for a mortgage bond. And the manager of the branch sat and listened to my spiel very patiently and demurely, a bit like you're doing now. And when he seemed that I'd finished, he leaned forward and he said, "Are you done now?" And I thought, that's an odd question. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This is a hoax, isn't it? This is a university prank." And I was so annoyed because I was full of earnestness in trying to get this mortgage, and he thought it was a joke. And if you think that's bad, think of the trouble I had as a 17-year-old kid when I'd ask a 17-year-old girl out on a date, and she'd also think I was 12, you know. But anyway, I persevered, with the banks, and I kept on going to bank after bank after bank. I changed my talk a bit and refined it until eventually a bank said yes, they would give me the money. Now think about it. Right now, interest rates in South Africa are about 15%. That's high, by the way. In the States at the moment, they're hovering around 6%. But when I got my first mortgage, this was for a property in New Zealand, the prevailing rates were 24%. And yet still, I was happy to do it because with such high interest rates, it means that prices were adjusted. My yield on that property was 27%. And I knew that in all probability, interest rates would come down rather than go up. It wasn't a certainty. In Argentina and Israel, we've seen interest rates of over 1,000%. So 24 is quite low. But anyway, we've got to think of interest rates when we're figuring this out. I bought my first property, 24% interest, but I got my check for the first month's rental. And it was for more money than the mortgage cost me, the council taxes, the insurance premiums, the maintenance fee. I had money left over, Neil, and I hadn't worked for it. And I thought at 17, what am I missing? Is there something wrong with this formula? And until I could identify what was wrong, I thought, I've got to buy another one. So off I went and bought another one, and then another one, and another. And I kept on studying because the indoctrination hadn't left me yet. And at the end of 4 years, I finished up with an honors bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. And they came to me and said, "Dolf, it's 4 years for a bachelor's degree. It's only 1 more year for a master's. Why don't you do that?" And I couldn't think of a reason, so off I enrolled for a master's program. And halfway through that, they said, Dolf, you're doing so well, why don't you switch to doing a PhD? And I didn't have a reason, so that's what I did. By the way, as a little side note, this is why you've got to have your own passion, because if you don't, you end up doing what other people want you to do. So anyway, they say there are 3 kinds of student: part-time, full-time, and eternal. I was the eternal kind. I ended up spending 8 years at university, at the end of which I ended up with a piece of paper that said PhD. Now think back to my parents. They were the ones who said that degrees equates to wealth, and here I'd gotten a PhD. So of course they were very proud. In fact, they were waiting by the telephone for me to announce the acceptance of a job. And Neale, I must confess, I went for 2 job interviews. And at the end of the second interview, I was offered a job as an engineer at $32,000 a year, New Zealand dollars a year, which back then was a very handsome salary. But unfortunately for my prospective employers, the week before, I had just completed a real estate deal that netted me $35,000. And to this day, I remember very clearly thinking, why would anyone in his or her right mind work for 40 hours a week for 50 weeks of the year, turning up every morning at 8 o'clock saying, hi boss, here I am, what do you want me to do today? For $32 lousy $1,000, when in 1 week you can make $35,000 and take the rest of the year off, or do it again, or do whatever you like. So I did not accept that job, and to this day, I have the dubious distinction of never having had a job. People come up to me all the time, Neale, and say, what's it like, Dolf, never having had a job? And when you think about it, it's a bit of an asinine question. It's a bit like me saying to you, what's it like, Neale, never having canoed to Pluto? So, yeah, I don't know, well, I don't know what it's like having a job. I know I don't want one because friends I've got that have jobs keep on complaining about them. You wouldn't believe what my boss tried to get me to do today, and it's not right. He tried the same thing 3 weeks ago, and it's just not right. And I say, well, I have the solution. They say, really, what is it? I say, quit. And they say, oh, I can't quit. I've got to feed the kids. I've got to pay the bills. And I say, get into real estate, which kind of brings us to this topic, how you can do really well in either an up or a down market. I'm particularly interested in how you do well in a down market, because when the market's on the rise, everyone's trying to tell you how to do well. They say, just get in, buy something. And before you know it, they do buy something, the market's gone up, and everyone's done well, and people start deluding themselves, Neale, that they're smart. When they're not smart, the market's just rising. Smart real estate investors are people who can do well even when the market is in decline. And that's why we're doing this tour of the country. It's teaching people how to do well when all the newspapers and magazines are saying, oh, it's doom and gloom. You better get out of real estate. It reminds us of the days of the Depression and the downturn in the 80s and the downturn then. And anyone who bought real estate, I bet they're regretting it now. And part of the reason for that, Neale, is we've got to understand what motivates everyone and why they do what they do. What motivates newspapers, with all due respect to those newspaper magnates who might be watching and being horrified at what I'm saying, they have to sell newspapers. They have to make money. They do that through 2 mechanisms. They sell lots of newspaper copies through subscriptions and stand sales, and they sell advertising space. And the advertising space that they can sell and the amount of money they can charge is in direct proportion to the readership. So if you have a headline in a newspaper that says, body washed up on beach, people tend to buy it. But when then you realize it's not a human body, it's a whale body, they think, oh man, this is bait and switch. But if the headline had been, whale cadaver found stinking and rotting on the beach, no one would buy the newspaper. So they're after sensationalism. And when you say in the newspapers around the world, after a run-up in real estate values of over 300% over the last 12 years, properties have come off the top by 3%, no one would buy that newspaper. But when they say doom and gloom, major crashes in real estate values, people are losing their houses left, right, and center. Look at poor Mrs. Jones. She's been evicted from a house by a rapacious, racketeering landlord or by a rapacious bank who's repossessing this house that they're unfairly repossessing. I mean, that sells newspapers. So I think, and I'm exaggerating a bit, but I think there's an element of sensationalism in the downturn. Yes, we've got a downturn going on worldwide. It was led by the United States, Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom. They're all following. South Africa is as well. But there are strategies that you can adopt to insulate yourself from this. And more interestingly, there are things you can do in a down market which can earn you more money than you can do in an up market. All you need, Neale, is the courage and the guts and the temerity to take action rather than to believe the newspapers and the magazines and say, well, we're doomed. Let's plan our funeral.
Absolutely. So Dolf, share a little bit more about those the kind of advice you can give to investors out there in a down market. We've had 9 interest rate hikes and 9 points, 0.5% at up to 15%. There's talk of another interest rate hike. So obviously the newspapers and the general media have in fact got to a lot of investors out there. What are the kind of things that you advise that investors can do to be able to fix their current portfolios, who are probably, a lot of them are cash flow negative? Share a little bit a bit of positivity and for investors out there to say, stick it out. Or what kind of advice? What would you say?
Well, firstly, Neil, let me say this. Let's contrast it when the market is good, because everyone wants to join a good bandwagon. And yet when the market is good, when prices keep going up, we talk about the greater fool theory. We have this theory that no matter how much you pay for a property, it's way above market. It doesn't matter, because tomorrow there'll be a bigger fool to pay even more money for it. And what happens is prices just keep on hiking up into the stratosphere, and there's no sense or rhyme or reason to it. You can get burnt easily, because if prices move too fast for too long, they will come down. Conversely, when prices are coming down, they'll go down too far as well. It's always human nature. Human beings have the capacity to think back about 7 years. So if it's been on the rise for more than 7 years, people think, well, it's always going to be like this forever. And if it's been down on the doldrums for more than 7 years, it will always be like that. We can give you countless examples. The Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia is a prime example where for 13 years, the market kept on going down or was flat. And people thought that's the way it will be forever. And yet the smart investors knew that with the population increasing, we'll get back to population increases in a moment, there was this kettle that was just bursting at the seams. It had to explode, and it did. Prices soared again. So the market overshoots on the way up, and it overshoots on the way down. So timing comes into it. Just as we had the greater fool theory going up, now when it's coming down, people are thinking doom and gloom. It's going to be bad forever. We'll never be able to get into property again. We'll never be able to afford a house again. We're going to lose our shirts, all this sort of stuff. That is the exact time when you should be thinking, I should be getting into this market. It's overshot. Secondly, the bargains you can get when the market is down are astounding, because people will end up paying you money to take a property off their hands. Thirdly, Neil, when people are in this down economy, they don't think they can ever get a tenant for anything. Right. Now, I'm a particular proponent of commercial property, and we can talk about that later. I've just come out with my 11th book. Here is Commercial Real Estate Investing, and it explains why I think commercial real estate is so much better than residential. It doesn't negate the 10 books I'd written prior on residential. This one here was on bestseller lists in 8 countries, including, I believe, here in South Africa. Real Estate Riches, which expounds the virtues of residential real estate. I still think residential real estate is miles better than stocks, bonds, certificates of deposits, treasury bills, mutual funds, unit trusts, all those things that are derivatives of the stock market, and where you put your assets in the hands of someone else who wants to make money from you. So they have exit commissions, entry commissions, transfer commissions, and you name it. And management fees, they make money all the way through. In fact, I maintain, as an aside, Neil, that more financial planners will tip their clients into real estate when they figure out a way of earning money from their clients by putting them into real estate. But because financial planners get nothing when they recommend real estate, but they get all those other commissions I mentioned when they put you into some derivative like options or futures or whatever, they have a natural inclination to say, well, I wouldn't get into real estate. If you have a house, that's probably all you need. Put it into something where I can make money. They don't use those words, but that's what it boils down to. So despite the fact that I think real estate, residential real estate, is better than all those alternative investments, when it comes to the broad spectrum of real estate, I'm a particular proponent of commercial real estate. So let's imagine there's a vacant building. The owner can no longer pay the mortgage because he hasn't got a tenant, and he's down in the doldrums. He's going to have it repossessed. There's going to be a mortgagee sale or a mortgagee in possession sale, what in the States is sometimes called a foreclosure sale. What can you do? Why would you take over this headache? Well, before even thinking about taking over the headache, why not figure out a way to attract a tenant to that building? And this brings us into another whole realm, and we sometimes do a whole weekend session just on how to attract tenants, because it's my observation, and I believe I'm a pretty simple person. I look at a need and I figure out how we can fill that need. It's my observation, Neil, that most landlords, when they need a tenant, they run an advertisement in the local paper. Property for rent, 300 square meters, suitable for this kind of industry or shop or business or a home or something. And they sit by the phone waiting for the calls to flood in. And when they haven't had any calls for a week, they run another advertisement. And they do this 6 months in a row and say, oh, the market is bad. Well, we have developed 21 separate techniques for attracting tenants, and this is one of the things we go over in our trainings, and some of them might seem pretty simple. For instance, run an ad in the paper. That is number one, because we want to have it covered. But if you've got a house for rent, for instance, why not knock up and down the street all around and saying, I manage that property, whether you want to reveal that you own it or not is up to you. I manage that property. And before I run some ads in the paper, I just wanted to see if you maybe had any friends or relatives moving to town or moving to this part of the town and you wanted to have them live nearby. And for every 19 people that slam the door on your face and say, no, and don't ever bother me again, you'll find someone who say, oh my God, yes, my sister's coming to town. Oh, I'd love her to live in the same street. Oh, please don't rent it to anyone else. I don't even care what the rent is. Just keep it in reserve for us. Now, you might think that's far-fetched, but try it. You'll be surprised how often you find a tenant this way. Or create a flyer, just an A4 size flyer with a photo of the property and a brief description, the rent and where it is and all that sort of thing, and have some kid distribute it for 2 blocks around your area. You'll be surprised how often that happens. We had homes near police stations, for instance. I'd go to the police station and say, may I put a notice on your police station notice board? And they say, well, what's it about? And I would say, well, I specialize in renting to police officers, and I would be happy if there'd be someone who needs a house. Now, Neale, the question is, do you have to specialize in renting to police officers in order to put a notice on the police station notice board?
Certainly not.
Well, people say no, but the answer is yes. Firstly, you always have to be in integrity. And secondly, I love having police officers as tenants because they tend to pay the rent on time. And not only that, the neighbors enjoy having them as tenants too, because every now and then there's a police car parked outside and it's good for security. In other parts of town, we might have homes near a nursing school where people train to become nurses. So we put notices on their notice board saying we specialize in renting to nurses. Do I specialize in renting to nurses? Yes, you better believe it. They are great tenants. So that's another way. And we go right through these 21 to the ultimate one, which is not to have a vacant premise for which you want a tenant, but to find the tenant first. So in this down market, in fact, one of the things that I'll be doing here in South Africa is running ads in the newspaper saying, you know, we have different kinds of space. Are there any tenants out there who want this? And when people call, I'll say, well, we've run out of that, but if you tell me exactly what you want, I'll look for a property for you. Now, imagine someone comes to me and says, yes, I have an industry, or I'm in this particular sector. I need 1,000 square meters that is suitable for light industrial work with at least, 200 meters of office space. And let's say I don't have that in my portfolio. Can you imagine in this down market picking up a premise like that for a song? Sure. Of course I can. I have a tenant who's willing to pay market rentals. He needs it to run his business. The real estate market is down, so I can buy something for a bargain price. It'll be extra cheap because it's vacant. As you may know, with commercial real estate, when it's vacant, the price is very low. When it's tenanted, it's a lot higher, unlike residential property, where the value of a house tends to stay the same, whether there's a tenant there or not. So in this down market, I can get tenants, find cheap properties for them, marry the two together. Often I'll get a mortgage bond for more than I'm paying for the property, because by the time I put the tenant in, the value might have doubled. So when I get a 50% mortgage, which is not a very high loan-to-value ratio, that covers my purchase price. I love this market. I've been waiting for this market to go down for years. I've been hoping, I don't want to exaggerate, but I've kind of been praying for it to go down for years, because now when it's down, I can get into action and have some fun. When there's irrational exuberance and the market is high, then it's difficult to have fun. It's difficult for me to compete against people with irrational exuberance. That's another way of saying it's difficult for me to compete against fools.
Sure. Dolf, I'm an investor. I'm sitting with 4 or 5 properties in my portfolio. We've had, in South Africa in particular, since 2001 up until now, we've had huge capital growth, sometimes in excess of 30% some years. It seems to me that that has come to an end now. In fact, there's talk of housing slumps right now. I'm sitting with 4 or 5 portfolios. I've had around about 9 interest rate hikes. And that's affected my cash flow, because I was either breaking even or I was cash flow negative even prior to that, which in a lot of cases is the instance here in South Africa. So what advice would you give those kind of investors? I might be a little bit discouraged right now. So I might maybe want to exit the market. What do I do?
All right, well, I want to talk globally first and then narrow it down to your situation. Okay. Firstly, I understand that here in South Africa it's very difficult to get interest rates that are fixed for more than a couple of years. Now, to me, that now seems absurd. It seems an anomaly. And remember, I started in New Zealand where we could fix the interest rate for a maximum of 5 years and under special circumstances for 7 years. And then when you live in the States for a while and you can fix your interest rate for 30 years and even 40 years on a 40-year loan, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think the United States is such a tremendously dynamic and wonderful market to operate in. Your interest cost, which is the biggest cost in an investment, is fixed for the duration of that mortgage bond. That is delightful. So the first thing to do is to try to fix your interest rates for longer periods here. Now, it might be difficult on the 4 or 5 properties in your portfolio to retroactively get those fixed. But I said, talking globally first, maybe it's time for some South Africans to think in terms of investing abroad. And now I'm not being seditious. If you think, what's this guy coming to South Africa, telling us to take our money out of the country, the rand is going to go down even further if investors take their money abroad. I want to give you an analogy. With all due respect to my many friends in the United Kingdom, and I do have lots of friends there, had a great time in Oxford on the way down here with one of them. With all due respect, when we think in terms of the United Kingdom, would you go there because of the level of their fashion? Well, no, you go to Paris or Milan. Do you go there because of the culinary delights in England? Excuse me, but no. Do you go there on account of the wonderful weather where you can lie on their beaches? No, everyone in England is pale because the sun never comes through. What earthly reason would you have to do any business in the United Kingdom? Is it the quality of their cars? Well, no, I think the Japanese and the Germans have them beat on that one. So my contention is that all other things being equal, the economy in England shouldn't be doing very well. And it is. And the reason why it is doing well is because over the last couple of 100 years, the Brits have gone abroad and invested. And they've invested in petrochemicals and transportation and pharmaceuticals, you name it. Right now, London controls 70% of the reinsurance industry, and most of the remaining 30% is mopped up by Switzerland. It's from investments they've made in the past. So, Neale, it's my contention that England is doing better than it would otherwise be able to do because of investments it made overseas, and that money is now flowing back to people in England. And that's why I say if South Africans spent more time investing abroad, it will have a long-term effect of bringing money back to South Africa as the profits and the capital gains that they make are repatriated back to South Africa. Now, by investing abroad, you can get fixed interest rates, and there are obvious advantages. But let's say we're not going to do that immediately. We're stuck with these 4 or 5 properties. You can't do anything to the interest rate. It's floating, and you're at the behest of the bank as to whether they say we're going to jack them up another 2% because the newspapers are saying the market's down, and we're capitalizing on this, and we're going to jack up rates. What can you do? You may be forced to sell one of your properties. Here's the reason why. You say that you've had 30% increases for a number of years. Well, you compound 30% for a few years and you've had a trebling in value. Doesn't take long. It's the rule of 72. It takes, what would it be? Just over 2 years for the value to double at 30% interest. So if you've had 5 properties that have all doubled or trebled in value, so what if you have to sell one, even at a discount to what you might have gotten 2 years ago at the height of the market? That should give you enough cash to be able to pay the mortgage interest for the next couple of years. Interest rates will come down. We tend to forget that things go in cycles. And one of the disadvantages for me, Neale, having reached the age where my hair is going silver and I can no longer crack a joke that I dye my hair silver to look more distinguished, people think, yeah, it's natural. One of the disadvantages of having reached that age is that you've experienced a number of cycles. Of course, with that disadvantage comes the wisdom of being a bit older. A fool thinks he's wise. It is the wise person who knows himself to be a fool. So with age, you have seen these cycles. And I know that even though interest rates are high here and prices are down a bit, and things may get a bit worse before they get better, I know through experience and gut instinctive feel now that this market's going to turn and it's going to be better than ever. And those people in South Africa who have the guts and the courage to make a move now are going to reap the benefit for years and generations to come. It's as sure as day follows night, and there's a specific reason for that. One of the highest correlating factors between what happens to real estate values anywhere in the world is population growth. There are 2 nations on this planet where the population is in decline. One of them is Japan. They currently have about 133 million people. It is predicted with their current birth rate and the deficit between immigration and immigration, that within 1 generation, the population of Japan will dip below 100 million people. Now, that might be good for reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and all other things, but it's bad for real estate values. So already we've seen real estate values starting to inch downward. There are things you can buy in Hokkaido, where I'm looking at the moment, where you can buy things that sold for 6 billion yen, you pick them up for 2 billion yen. It is astoundingly cheap, but the question is what's going to happen in the future? Because if in 5 years' time you can get it for 1 billion yen, it's a bad investment. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. It has the dubious distinction not only of being the fastest growing city on the western seaboard of the States, or the fastest growing city in all of the United States, it is the fastest growing city on this planet. And would you believe it? It has also consistently had the highest growth rates and capital values on this planet. There is a one-to-one correlation between population growth and capital values. It is my humble prediction that here in South Africa, you're going to see tremendous increases in capital value. And it comes about for 3 reasons. One of them we've touched upon, it's population growth. That creates a demand pressure that is there. Secondly, you've got the natural forces of inflation through oil values going up. A lot of building materials are allied to oil. It's going to go up for that reason. But thirdly, and perhaps most importantly in South Africa, you've got a massive middle class or burgeoning middle class that is getting into that consumption area where for the first time they can afford cell phones, flat screen TVs, satellite dish receivers, and as a natural consequence of that, homes. I think in relation to the population of South Africa, you're going to see more people reach that stage where they can buy their first home or upgrade to a better home. On a per capita basis, it's going to be higher in South Africa than any Western nation on this planet. So it's my prediction that South Africa is going to do better in real estate than just about any other country. That's why not only am I doing a speaking tour here, and we're doing a few things like that, I'm looking at what deals can be done here because I believe there's a great future for real estate here.
Fantastic. Investors are always looking for resources, Dolf. I mean, people like yourself, I think it's wonderful that we got you here in South Africa, that we can try and glean as much as possible from you. What kind of resources can investors use just to keep them at the top of their game? What can you advise?
Well, listen, I believe readers are leaders. I always say he who does not read has no advantage over he who cannot read. I think one of the best sources of information is books, and I know this is a great lead-in perhaps for me to promote my own books, but before I even talk about my own, I want to say, in all honesty, it doesn't really matter which books on real estate you read. I don't think there's such a thing as a bad book on real estate. I believe that just about, with very few exceptions, every author on real estate was genuine in trying to get his message across, and he genuinely made a lot of money doing what he or she, as the case may be, did when they described what they did in their books. That's why I would recommend get a book every week or at least every month. I do. I go to the bookstore regularly. There's one walking distance from my home in Phoenix, and I see what's new, and if I haven't read it, I buy the book. Here's my theory. If you spend 150 Rand in 3 hours of your life reading a book that you haven't read before, and even if you only get one idea from that book could be worth 100,000 Rand a year to you in terms of extra revenue. So why would you not read it? I think I mentioned I've got 11 books. This book on commercial real estate is my 11th. It is one of the few books out there on commercial real estate, and it's not sophisticated. There are no big formulas in here. This is a book that anyone can read and apply straight away. If you're not a reader, it took me a while to realize this, not everyone absorbs information well by reading words. Some learn auditorily, so from CDs. We have a number of CD courses available. And you can go to my website, it's just myname.com, it's not myname.com, it's dolfderoos.com, it's myname.com. And you have a version here in South Africa for that. You can get products there. In fact, we've also got a special going on here. If you come to the breakfast sessions or our full-day trainings, we've got an incredible price. We've never offered it before, but it's my way of saying I want people in South Africa to get a head start. I know the Rand is low. In fact, the US dollar is pretty low. Yeah. The Rand has the horrible distinction of being even worse off than the US dollar. So I empathize with you because I know what it feels like having a sinking currency. Yours is sinking. So we've got an incredible special. The other thing that I think readers should do is this magazine here, the South African Real Estate Investor Magazine. It is fabulous. In fact, you know, let's, in the interest of full disclosure, I was involved with you, or on your invitation. We met in Wellington a couple of years ago, involved in setting this up. Yes. So it's, that's just full disclosure, I guess. Yes, however, what do you charge for this a year here in South Africa?
210 Rand for six editions.
210 Rand, folks. If you're looking at acquiring real estate for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of rand. Why would you not spend 210 rand in a year to get information? This is full of articles and ideas and concepts and leads. You have a master investor that you study every issue to see what they did. You learn by following other people's examples. I always say that experience is the best teacher, Neale, but it doesn't always have to be your own experience. Right. I do not personally need to experience cocaine to know from the experience of cocaine whether I want to do it. I'm happy to go by the experience of other people. And it's the same with real estate. I model other people. And the more people you can model, the better off you are. So I'd say go out there and read books, get whatever books you can. Go to a bookstore today and get a book you have not yet read on real estate and read it and get one idea. Subscribe to this magazine if you haven't got it. Get an issue off a book stand or borrow it. Sacrilegious if you're in the game of selling magazines, but borrow a copy from a friend, because ultimately when you read this, you'll say, I want my own issue. In fact, I don't want to have to remember to go to the bookshop every month or every 2 months. I want it sent to me by subscription. You learn by forming mastermind groups with other people. Go to your local Property Investors Association meetings. Sign up. They're incredibly cheap in the scheme of things, and mix and mingle with other people. Decide if you need to fire any friends. I know this sounds like a radical move, but often friends will drag in, hey, Neale, what are you doing thinking you can buy another property? Don't you have 5 already? Shouldn't you leave some for the rest of the people on this planet? And what do you want to be such a greedy person for anyway? What are you going to do with your money? Give it to me? I mean, all this psychobabble, it gets to you after a while. Fire your friends who don't serve you and hang with people that you can aspire to be like. And that's the way you build up your own portfolio. You build up your self-confidence. You build up the courage of your own convictions. Listen, having courage, Neale, doesn't mean to say you're not scared. I mean, I've been scared plenty of times. Having courage means acting despite your fear and doing it anyway. And it's that old saying that without sorrow there can be no joy, without darkness there can be no light. And without hard work and taking on a bit of risk, there can be no success. I know people counter that. They say, there's no substitute for hard work, especially if your parents have done it for you. You know, and that's kind of true. But most of us don't have the luxury of having parents who've worked hard for us. Or in my case, my parents worked very hard, but they were very much blue-collar people. They ran motels and ran convenience stores. They never even owned them. So I've seen what it's like to work really hard for someone else. And I think partially that's what motivated me to find a mechanism of getting passive income. I'm sure everyone's heard this view before. Passive income is income that is generated for you even when you're asleep, even when you're on the beach reading a book on real estate, or a novel for that matter, or even when you're doing anything you care to do, money still comes into your bank account. And that's the name of the game, because if you're salaried, I don't care how high your salary is, if you get fired, your salary stops. And anyway, how boring would it be to know on the 1st of January of every year exactly how much you would have earned by the 31st of December? And working really hard and diligently, and oh, here comes the boss, let's back up, we're really working hard, to get a 3% raise. Sure. When you could go out there to find another real estate deal that could net you R1 million just by signing the contract, because you have cracked the formula on how to find a tenant. It's so simple, Neale. I mean, I can give an example. I have no idea how much time we've got today, but look at it this way. Let's say you've got a warehouse, a vacant warehouse, in a sea of similar vacant warehouses right throughout town. I am telling you, Neale, I can find a tenant for that very quickly when all my other landlords are still struggling. And I'll tell you right now, it's very simple. Who decides whether to take on the lease of a warehouse? Is it the manager of, what is it called, the board of directors, the head of the board of directors? No. Is it the president of the company? No. Is it the CEO? No. Is it the coffee or tea person who's going to make coffee and tea in the warehouse? No. Almost without exception, it's the manager who will manage the operation at that warehouse. So he goes to inspect all the warehouses. And he looks at his manager's office, where he's going to be sitting for 8 or 9 hours a day for 40 hours a week. So what we do is we make that office the most salubrious office you can imagine. We spend no more than 100,000 rand. We put in a beautiful carpet. Most of these managers' offices have vinyl or linoleum or something on the floor, or bare concrete. We put in a big plasma screen, and you and I know what he's going to watch on that plasma screen, but we tell him, well, this is good for corporate training DVDs. Now, he doesn't believe you, but it's a good line he can use when he talks to the president to tell him why he's rented that premise or not. We put in a coffee machine, which is running while he's going there. If he likes coffee, he can smell the coffee. We put in a little bar fridge and say, this is where you can store what you use for the Friday afternoon celebration of the end of the week. We put in triple glazed windows to keep the noise out and the heat out or the cold out. And we put in beautiful lighting, halogen lighting, get rid of those fluorescent tubes. We put in beautiful oak furniture and a leather chair that he can sit back on and put his feet up on the desk. And this manager walks in, he's looked at 12 other vacant warehouses, all ho-hum, and he looks at yours and he says, well, I'd be spending my time in this office? Sign me up. It works every time. Now, you might call that bribery and corruption. We refer to it as very sensible ways of tempting people to rent your premises in an open market versus anyone else's. So this is just one of the techniques that we've got, Neale, and that we can share with people at these trainings and in our books, by the way. It's all covered in the book, and we've got a 12 CD course on commercial real estate investing too, so that you can get the edge, how you can beat the average. It's all about beating the average. And in the process, Neale, you end up having a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Dolf, at the beginning of the conversation, you were talking about the broader investment type principles, more of the sort of the more softer type principles that we need to apply for us to become great investors. I know that you've got your Wealth Magnet program, and what are those broader kind of things that investors can apply to improve their lot? Probably more from a mental perspective.
Well, it's interesting you ask. I was teaching real estate around the world in 25 countries for years, and I decided to make a study. I wanted to know how many of my students became millionaires within 18 months or 24 months. And when the results came in, I was mortified and horrified and disappointed in myself, because it was between 3 and 4%. And I beat up on myself. I thought, maybe it's my accent. Maybe I'm talking too fast. Maybe I'm talking too slowly. Maybe I'm not clear enough in my methodology. So I decided to embark on a second study. The first study, you may recall, it wasn't the PhD. It was, what do the rich have in common? It took 9 months. The second study was, why is it that when you give people all the tools they need to get rich, they still don't get rich? It took 11 months. I was determined to crack it. And eventually I did. And I realized it had nothing to do with my accent or the rate of my speech or the quality of the information. It had everything to do with the psychology of the student. Because unfortunately, we grow up in a society where we're very negative on money. You hear them as cliches, but they're drummed into us so often they become part of us. We hear money is the root of all evil. Money can't buy you happiness. Money doesn't grow on trees. It is easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven, which sounds to the subconscious like, if you're rich, you're condemned to hell. And we have all these sayings that keep coming up, and they get indoctrinated into our subconscious. To the extent, Neale, that all over the Western world, people who win the lottery, they don't win 10 or 20,000 rand. They win millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of rand. And yet, statistically, it's shown that within 5 years of winning the lottery, 80% of the winners, financially, are back to where they were before they won. 4 out of 5 people have gotten rid of all their money. And it created a dilemma for me, because if I knew that 4 out of 5 people, when you give them millions, squander their money, how can I ever hope to teach them how to make millions and keep it? Now, I know what you might be thinking. Yeah. Try me. Give me millions. See if I get rid of it. Even if I do, it will have been a lot of fun. But the real answer is, people squander their money because of these subconscious beliefs. So one of the things we do, and we have a whole weekend event called the Psychology of Creating Wealth, is we figure out what are the beliefs that are holding each individual back, because we all have them. We've all got things that's stuck in our mind. And for me, the one was, I'd say, Mom, I want a bicycle or whatever. And she'd say, what do you think, that money grows on trees? And I'd think, what an absurd question, because of course it doesn't. But I got the message. Money is hard to come by. And then we've got these other things. If you haven't worked hard for it, you don't deserve it. And all these things that when I say these to audiences of thousands of people, everyone's nodding away. Well, we take these beliefs and we rip them up, we destroy them, and we replace them with more empowering beliefs. And we probably don't have time to go into it now. But the interesting thing is, the new belief you need to replace it with, you don't even have to believe it yet. It can be that money comes to me easily. You might think, well, it doesn't. I'm hard up. I've got no money in my wallet. I'm broke. I'm up to my neck in debt. How can I ever say money comes to me easily? But here's the thing, Neale. If you say that often enough, loud enough, preferably out loud, in front of someone else that you care about, because if it's a stranger on the street, you might think, who cares? You say that often enough, suddenly your subconscious will begin to take that on. The other thing we encourage people to do, it normally astounds them, but have a lot of cash on your person. Usually when I say, do you have any cash on you? People say, oh no, I might lose it, or I might spend it. In other words, they don't trust themselves not to lose it or spend it, or they say, it might be stolen from me, which means we don't trust other people not to steal it from us. Well, if you don't trust yourself because you'll either lose it or spend it, and you don't trust other people because they'll steal it from you, who is there left to trust? So the reason why many people don't have millions of rand is because they don't trust themselves with a couple of thousand of rand in their pocket. So one of the things we get people to do is take an obscenely large amount of money, like whatever it is for any individual, 10,000 rand, and if that doesn't juice it for you, 20,000, and carry it on your person. Yeah, wow, most people react that way.
That's a lot of money.
And we get more emails from people who've gone through this program and say, it changed my life. For the first time in my life, I felt as though I was in control of my money. I had that 20,000 rand on me for an entire month and I didn't spend it. Because when you don't have cash on your person because you don't trust yourself not to spend it, if you don't trust yourself with 20,000 rand, how can you hope to expect me to teach you how to make 20 million rand?
Absolutely.
You know, so anyway, we have all these tools to change the psychology of an individual, the way they see money, the way they react to money. And it doesn't mean to say you have to be obsessed with it. You just need to be neutral on it. Money is a tool. Money of itself cannot do much for you.
Sure.
But, you know, people say money can't buy you happiness. Mm-hmm. Well, my answer to that is if you're going to be unhappy anyway, you may as well be rich and unhappy rather than poor and unhappy. Or another way of putting it is, your poverty can help no one, but your wealth can help a lot of people. And that's one of the things we have the luxury of doing, is seeing how we can help people who don't have the fortune that we do to achieve higher aspirations and higher goals. And again, when it comes to me teaching things, I can give someone a lump of cash, and of course they're very happy, but a year later they're waiting for me to give them another lump. Or I can take a bunch of people. We do this on our weekend events where we'll have scholarships for people who otherwise couldn't afford to come along. And we teach them, we only ask one thing of them, that they share the knowledge they learn that weekend with other people back home who also don't have the ability to get that knowledge. And it gives you the power to do things that you can't do when you're poor. Sure. Who is more pious, Neale? A person who passes away at the age of 88 and bequeaths all of their net worth to some charity. All 100 rand of their net worth. Or someone like Bill Gates, who has an operating system that many of us don't like. We think of the blue screen of death with words that I can't even use on camera, right? But a man who has already, and he's still quite young, I say that because he's about my age, so of course he's quite young, but a man who's already donated $6 billion. And you might say, well, that's a small fraction of his net worth. But who's done more good in society? The person who gave 100 rand or the person who gave $6 billion? And that's why I say your poverty can help no one. Your wealth can help a lot of people. So there's nothing wrong with aspiring to be wealthy. And there's nothing wrong with being wealthy. Go for it, I'd say.
Dolf, that was absolutely awe-inspiring stuff. Once again, I think just share with the viewers out there when the program is going to be around South Africa. I know you're doing breakfasts in Johannesburg, in Pretoria on the 14th, 13th in Johannesburg, on the 21st in Durban, yes. 22nd in Port Elizabeth, Cape Town on the 23rd. Mm-hmm. I really encourage you to go along and see that. I thank you for coming to the studio today.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to touring the country and also seeing what deals are available, because I know the deal of the decade really does come along about once a week.
Folks, from what you have seen and heard here this morning, property investment is still the most tried and tested way to strengthen yourself financially. In the cinema today, the 7 Habits agents are standing by to answer questions that you may still have. Register you as a 7 Habits agent or investor, or to reserve a unit at Metsi Pepper Game Reserve and Eco Estate. The 7 Habits agents are easy to spot. They all wear orange t-shirts that are clearly marked 7 Habits. Until next time, prosperous investing.